Popularity is no mark of quality. So, a more generalized movie list. I actually have a number of things sort of in a similar vein to this that I'm working on. This is just the one I got to first. So I'm going to talk about 10 movies that I like that nobody saw. Now, with like some criteria when I say that, like what I did to sort of qualify or disqualify a movie from being on this list was to look at its box office returns and if it was a notable tanking, especially, and like, I don't think any of these are particularly high budget, so like, if they didn't make their money back, then really nobody saw them. That's sort of my basic thing. Now, I was sort of judging that off of box office. Some of these may have developed a little bit more of a cult following in the years since it was in the theaters, things like that. I didn't take that into account. I just went by what was the initial impact, and in pretty much every case, it was little to nothing. Now, not all of these were even wide releases, but you know what? That I didn't feel like putting that kind of caveat on it. Now, the last other thing, this list is in absolutely no particular order. I've got 10, so it is a top 10, but it's not ranked. So, starting with Shoot 'Em Up. I have so much fun with this movie. If you have not seen it or are not familiar with it, and actually it just occurred to me, you probably won't be with most of these, so I need to explain all of these as I go. Shoot 'Em Up was a film starring Clive Owen and Paul Giamatti, which is basically a Looney Tunes cartoon done in live action with guns. And I know that sounds weird, and I don't mean that quite as literal as it sounds, but what I mean is, like, forget physics. Physics are immediately out the window. The thing's done with, like, a guy shooting a gun at, like, a merry-go-round and hitting it at the right angle starts the merry-go-round spinning, and he shoots it a few more times to make it spin faster and faster and faster. It's that level of ridiculousness. And that's not even close to the most ridiculous that this stuff happens. Basically, what this film is the people who made it sat down and thought, what's the most ridiculous, cool stuff that we would like to see done in a gunfight in a movie that no one else will ever do because they'll go, that's not believable. And they poured it all into this movie. And the performances are actually a lot of fun too. Clive Owen, doing the very stoic thing, but it is set up very deliberately. Clive Owen is Bugs Bunny, and Paul Giamatti is sort of the head of the bad guys as Elmer Fudd. That is made really explicit in a few ways, and they do kind of have that dynamic of constant thinks he's got him, outwits him sort of thing going on with all this insane gunfighting. And Paul Giamatti is so much fun. Like, all of it is great. There are like a couple of tiny lulls in it, but man, if you are prepared to have a gunfight that has no intention of being anything close to realistic, yeah, this is something that you should see. Next one from there, it's a movie that I've actually talked about before. And I may at some point have to do a more in-depth explanation of what I like about it, but that is Repo, the Genetic Opera. This is a fairly recent, I say fairly, I guess it's about a decade old now, but it's not all that old movie musical that did not do very well at all. And I can see why. And here's the thing. Some of these, like, I don't get why they weren't successful, other than, like, not, it was marketed improperly. I think something like Shoot 'Em Up, maybe that was the case, or maybe just the world wasn't ready because we were kind of in the middle of the more gritty, down-to-earth stuff. I think it came out the same year Dark Knight did. But with something like this, with something like Repo, I can look at it and go, yeah, I get why most people look at this and go, I don't know what this is, but I don't like it. So what Repo is, as I said, it's a rock opera. It is set in a dystopian future in which people are able to replace any and all organs. In fact, it's so easy that they do it for completely cosmetic and no medically necessitated reason whatsoever, but they go into debt in order to do this, and these organs are basically on loan. If you miss a payment, it gets repossessed. If that sounds familiar, yes, that is the exact same plot of the movie Repo Men, which came out around the same time and is not a musical, and I actually still haven't gotten around to seeing. But this movie has Anthony Stewart Head. It has I've lost all of a sudden I've lost names of the actors, but it's got One of the young actors from Spy Kids, you know, in her late teens, singing her, Alexa Vega, there we go, singing her heart out throughout the whole thing. Sarah Brightman, Christine from the original Broadway production of Phantom of the Opera, she's in this and she's awesome. The singing is great. The songs are insane. And what I like about this particularly is when I say rock opera, emphasis is on the opera part. This is operatic in the sense of nobody can just feel something or think something. They have to belt it to the heavens. Like the gods themselves have to hear how they feel about this. That's the way this story is told. Is it ridiculous? You bet your butt it is. But man, do I really like it. It is insane, and it is rocking, and it is gory, and it is not for everybody, but man, do I love it. Okay, so next up from there is a dark comedy that I feel like this is something more people found after it had its limited theater run, but we'll see. And that is World's Greatest Dad. Now, I actually debated putting either this or Let Sleeping Dogs Lie, or maybe it's just Let Dogs Lie. Whatever Bobcat Goldthwait, who wrote and directed this, whatever his previous movie was prior to this, I debated doing either one of these, but I went with this one. And this stars Robin Williams, and it is about a father a single father, who is a sort of a frustrated would-be author. He's getting by, teaching to pay the bills. I think it's at a high school level. And he has the world's worst son. His kid is a terrible human being, like on every level. He's awful. And the thing is, this is not heartwarming. When I say this is a dark comedy, I mean this is dark. And I don't want to say, even sort of I would say if you haven't seen this yet and it sounds at all appealing, check it out. Avoid descriptions if you can, because a lot of them kind of blow what happens within about the first half hour. I would say that hits better if you don't know what's going to happen. But the way things go, what I love about it is it basically, one of its core, it has a number of messages going on, but one of its core messages is the fact that you love somebody doesn't make them a good person. Because Robin Williams does love his son. But he's also a terrible, terrible, terrible human being. And he's kind of got to deal with that. And it's really good. It's like I said, it is very funny. It's a really great performance from Williams. And if you can handle some very raunchy, very dark humor, I would say check that one out. All right, what have I got next? Yes, let's get into a little bit of somber sci-fi with Never Let Me Go. So I feel like this is one that more people should have seen anyways, but I feel like if people had warmed to Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man more, this is the kind of thing that would have been this was where he was really good, and that other thing before we all knew from Spider-Man, but that didn't work out. So this didn't get the rediscovery I kind of would have hoped. Again, we're dealing with kind of a near future setting, not dealing with the extreme technology. Technology basically is what it is, but we are dealing with people being raised for their organs to be harvested. And the thing is, it's not as horrific as you would think based off that. Based off the description, you'd think it'd be something like Repo, where it's gory and awful, but it's not, because what it is it's an examination of these people, and it's just looking at their lives and the tragedy of their lives. It doesn't go down the body horror or the action route that it very easily could have with a different director and with a different mindset. It is a very low-key, emotionally driven, contemplative, relationship-based story with a science fiction gimmick. I hesitate to call it a science fiction movie because the science really just enables the specific brand of character and relationship drama that it's doing. But it's not, it lacks the trappings that you normally see in a sci-fi film. So if you have an enjoyment of these sorts of deep character dives, I would recommend it. It is somber, it is bittersweet, it is melancholy, and it is beautiful. What is that? 4 so far? Yeah. So we're up to 5. And another one that's actually kind of in a similar vein, in that it is also contemplative and melancholy and sci-fi, but the sci-fi is a bit more up front and center. And that is The Fountain. Darren Aronofsky's The Fountain. And this is one of the ones that always strikes me as odd that it was not as well received as I would have thought. Like, for me, it's very much in keeping with line with the movies he's made since, and the movies he made before, like Pi or Requiem for a Dream. Yet, for some reason, it didn't go down well for people. But what we've got here is we've got a 3 timeline romance story. Well, I say romance, it feels somewhat one-sided because it's largely about this man's obsession, the man played by Hugh Jackman, in these 3 different incarnations. One is sort of the Spanish conquistador sort of era, one modern day where he's a doctor, and then one set in the far future. In all 3 times, I'm obsessing over the distance between him and this woman, or how to attain this woman, or the fact that he lost this woman. It varies depending on the timeline, and the woman played by Rachel Weisz. And it's sad. It's gorgeous. I mean, it is a visually sad. I think this might have been the first movie I bought on Blu-ray. Like, it is a stunningly gorgeous film. I think maybe what throws people off about it is it doesn't explain itself very much. It just kind of shows you what's going on, but it doesn't explain what it is you're seeing. And I guess to a certain degree, and not in terms of theming at all, but in terms of storytelling approach, it bears a certain resemblance to 2001: A Space Odyssey in that way. For me, at least, the difference is I feel like there are enough pieces in play that you do understand, that you can make the connections. Now, they may not exactly be the connections that Darren Aronofsky had in terms of the narrative that he was building, but I feel like if you're willing to put in the work, you can come up with a workable theory of exactly how this works and is playing out. And I think Hugh Jackman really sells it exceptionally well. I think the visualization of the future setting and the way that space travel is done with this sort of energy bubble is really cool. I think this is a gorgeous movie, and I found it quite touching. So that's halfway through. Where are we now? Ah, yes. The one good movie that Tarsem Singh had in him. That's The Fall. The Fall is another slightly odd but visually stunning movie. I mean, and that's the one thing Tarsem Singh, he did The Cell, and he was best known for sort of music videos prior to that. And you can't take away the fact that the man has an amazing eye. His storytelling instincts, not so much. But The Fall happens to be about stuff that I almost always tend to connect with. It's a story about stories. And it deals with a guy who is a stuntman in the silent film era, who is injured in a stunt gone wrong, and now he's laid up in this hospital, and he starts having these conversations with this much younger girl. And when I say much younger, I mean she's, I don't know, 6 or something. And he starts telling her a story that he is making up, but is obviously very heavily influenced by the kind of movies he takes part in and sort of some issues that he's going through with his own life. And her eagerness to hear the story and what that does to him, his frustration with his own life and with wanting to sort of wrench control of his own life story, and how that starts to bleed into his interactions with her. And then the visualization of any and all of this is just astounding. I think that the performances are great, and the connection made between those 2 actors is really great. And that's what makes it more than just a pretty piece, is the emotions are really well sold by those actors. And I think this is a stunning film. So where are we now? Ah, yes. Robot and Frank. Frank Langella is an actor who I discovered in a very bad movie, and that is Masters of the Universe. And I love him as Skeletor, and I love him in literally everything I've ever seen him in. He is always stuck in my head, and this is one of the thing is he has a tendency to go big, like Shakespearean big. I mean, that's kind of the quality he brought to Skeletor. But what's on display here is much more low-key, is much more restrained, but no less powerful. Like, if you think of Frank Langella as an over-the-top actor, you need to see this film. Because it's... and this is actually... It's funny, I didn't think about the order that I had put these in, but I accidentally ended up grouping together things with similar themes. So this will come up again in a bit, but it's kind of a meditation on aging and on the ways in which one loses their own agency as they get older and they lose certain faculties and all the things that they need in order to take care of themselves. And so you have, again, a near-future setting. What is with me and near-future movies on this list? Huh. So it's not that far out technology-wise, but Frank, this elderly man, you know, who is an ex-thief, like professionally, he is given a robot that is meant to help him. And it's funny, in a way, I think this came out before Big Hero 6 did. In some ways, it feels like almost a test run for Baymax, because there's no, like, and the robot is learning and it gains a soul and sentience. No, there's none of that. It's a machine. It's programmed, but within the boundaries of its program, there is still a connection and a relationship to be had between the robot and Frank. And watching that relationship develop, seeing where it goes, seeing what it does for Frank, both in the positive and the negative, is just really well done. And I found quite touching. And now, like I said, I unintentionally somehow lumping together theme things. Another movie that I actually have talked about before. I didn't do a proper review on it, but the year that it came out, which I think was 2014, but that year I put it on my list of best movies of that year, and that is Mr. Holmes. And this is another sort of meditation on aging. So this has Ian McKellen playing Sherlock Holmes. Now, before you get too excited by that description, this is not a mystery solving Sherlock. This is a very, very old Sherlock Holmes who has some left of what he had in terms of his mind and his mental capabilities, but he's not what he once was. And he knows that. And him trying to come to terms with that, and part of that is funneled through him thinking on and trying to contemplate what to do about a case that he didn't finish. So there is a little bit of a mystery aspect, but that's incidental. That's sort of how one of the ways he's funneling his energies, but ultimately it's just about growing old and not being capable of being who you were, and sort of, in a way, living in the shadow of yourself. And this came out, this came out the same year my grandfather died. And he'd had dementia. He had a dwindling mental capacity as he got older. He didn't have Alzheimer's, so like he never didn't recognize me. He always knew who I was. He was always excited to see me, but he couldn't process new information very well anymore. And so maybe part of my connection to this is the timing with which I saw it, but I think it captures the frustration of somebody going through that towards the end of their life in a very real and moving way. We'll lighten things up slightly with the next one. We're almost done. And this one is another one that, again, I get it. It's really weird, and it's got a weird vibe, and it's got a weirder look, and that's Mirror Mask. This was pitched in some ways as like a spiritual successor to Labyrinth, which I don't think is a great comparison. Yes, it involves the Jim Henson Company, but it doesn't involve that aesthetic. It's not dealing with physical puppets. It's a very surreal, largely computer animated, some 2D animation, or like hybrid kind of stuff going on. It's a story about a teenage girl who actually is in the circus, sort of wanting to escape from that, and she finds herself in this fantastical world and now has to find a way out of it. And there are the usual sort of parallels to people in her real life. So like she meets a very clear, a one-to-one analog for her father and her mother, and despite having a very Alice in Wonderland kind of setup, it's got that sort of one layer detached. It feels almost like looking at a diorama. Like, it's hard to feel like you're part of it and you are just watching it. For me, though, that's part of the appeal. I think that's has a lot to do with the visual sensibilities of Dave McKean, who was the director on it. Neil Gaiman helped write it. And again, it does touch on things like the importance of stories and the value of stories, which I always appreciate. And there's just something about the pace and the progression of everything that clicks really well for me here. It's hard for me to put my finger on why I like this so much, but it just works. And I get why it doesn't work for a lot of people, but for me, yeah, it just works. All right, last one. And this one, I think part of the reason I put this one last is that I've mentioned before, I'm not big on romantic movies, especially anything that could be described as a romantic comedy, which this kind of is, but also kind of really isn't. And that's Don John. Now, this is a film starring and also directed by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And it's about a guy who is basically very into the gym, working out, and porn. That's all that he's about. And he's all about hitting the gym and watching porn and masturbating. That's his entire routine. And he gets involved with a girl played by Scarlett Johansson. We sort of see that relationship go on. But then, like his life doesn't add up. It doesn't come into parts. And there's a lot of very very blue humor going on. It's fairly raunchy, and there's some very funny moments involved in that. But ultimately, by the time it ends, and I don't want to explain how, but it became, by the time it was done, one of the most bizarrely but sincerely romantic films I'd ever seen. And I wasn't expecting it to happen from this film, and I definitely wasn't expecting it the way that it happened. And really to say much more than that would be a spoiler. But the performances are all great. Joseph Gordon-Levitt did a great job, and I think it's fantastic. So that's 10 movies that I love that basically nobody saw. Do you have movies that you like that were not well seen? Pretty sure we've all got a few movies that we like that it seemed like nobody else ever saw. What was it for you? Some of you saw as a kid, nostalgic favorite, some of you have seen more recently that got underviewed. Whatever it is, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. A whole bunch of stuff that you can do down there besides, because there's buttons and links and there's merch and there's my P.O. box and there's the link to the Patreon, which is immensely helpful and supportive. Thank you all who currently contribute. But, check all that. There's other stuff besides, and if you don't want to look at any of that, that's okay, because at the end of the day, you're the council, I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.